Is America in a libertarian moment? The 2012 presidential race pits two libertarian standard bearers, Texas Republican Congressman Ron Paul, who ran for president as a libertarian in 1988, and New Mexico's former two-term governor, Republican Gary Johnson. And while both candidates are considered long shots ultimately to win the presidency, the will of the voters to rein in big unconstitutional government is palpable. So, will there be a freedom-loving president sworn in come January 2013? Will there be a freedom-loving candidate of a major party running for president come November 2012? Here now with his predictions is my friend David Boaz, Executive Vice President at the Cato Institute. David, it's always a pleasure. Welcome back to Freedom Watch.
Thank you.
Are you surprised that it now appears that both Congressman Ron Paul and former Governor Gary Johnson will seek votes from essentially the same audience, the Barry Goldwater wing of the Republican Party, in a series of early primaries in New Hampshire and Iowa and South Carolina, and I guess as far as they can go?
Well, I'm a little surprised, given his age and the fact that 4 years ago he had said, I'm running because nobody else will talk about these ideas. I had assumed that Ron Paul probably would focus this year on being chairman of the House Subcommittee on Monetary Policy and let Gary Johnson take on the presidential race. But it looks like he does want to run. It looks like Gary Johnson is definitely running. And in general, you know, Coca-Cola proliferates different kinds of Coke, Diet Coke, caffeine-free Diet Coke, and they figure the more kinds of Coke there are, the more total market share they'll get. So I hope there will be more total market share for libertarian candidates.
All right, let me tell you what I think, and I suspect that you agree with me. I think that the stimulus packages, which began under President Bush and then were doubled in size under President Obama, the bailouts, which began under President Bush and continued under President Obama, the gross deficit spending, which began, you know, when we started the FDR, but really have accelerated under President Obama. He's borrowed $4 trillion in just 2 years in office, plus the health care reform, have basically caused a lot of people otherwise unfamiliar with libertarian ideas to take a look at the Constitution, to take a look at the Congress, to realize, my goodness, many of the things that the federal government does and makes me pay for are not authorized anywhere in the document that is supposed to confine the government. Do you agree or disagree?
Well, yes, I think that's right. And I think the Tea Party enthusiasm has clearly pressured Republicans to at least talk more about cutting spending, cutting deficits, controlling the size of government, actually eliminating something than they had done before. And I think Ron Paul does get some of the credit for that, especially the new attention to the Federal Reserve, the fact that Ben Bernanke's holding press conferences. But I would point out, Judge, there's also growing opposition to the war, growing support for gay marriage, growing support for marijuana legalization. So this isn't just a right-wing resurgence. This is, I think, a libertarian moment, a libertarian opportunity.
I agree with you. Both Congressman Paul and Governor Johnson are against all 5 wars that we're involved in. If you realize that we're in Yemen and Pakistan, as well as Libya, Iraq, and Afghanistan, I know you recognize that. And that's a very good point that you make. So let's ask you to put your political hat on. How well are they going to do mining for votes amongst conservative Republicans by being anti-war? Or, stated differently, are a lot of conservative Republicans or Republicans who vote in primaries becoming anti-war?
Well, it's a hard thing to predict, partly because you don't know who will vote in primaries. And there is this general sense that the Republican base is very conservative, even though the 50 to 60% of the public that's willing to vote for Republicans in a general election is somewhat more libertarian, somewhat more centrist, and so on. The question is, can those people be turned out in the primaries? And realistically, Ron Paul didn't do a very good job of that 4 years ago. He raised a lot of money and a lot of interest, but he didn't get that many votes. I do think Gary Johnson has the potential to reach a new audience that was less attracted to Ron Paul, that can be attracted to Gary Johnson. But can you get those people to the polls in a primary? Can you get their attention?
Understood. But Ron Paul has succeeded in bringing into the mainstream ideas that were once considered fringe, like returning to the gold standard, auditing the Fed, ending the Fed. These are now serious matters discussed by federal courts, discussed by members of Congress, and of interest to voters. He's almost single-handedly educated the public on the virtues of these ideas.
Yes, that's right, and that makes a big difference. There's a big article in the Daily Beast today that says Ron Paul is the most important intellectual influence in the Republican Party right now. That could be because there aren't a lot of competitors, but that he is ultimately not electable, but Gary Johnson, who has proven he can win in a Democratic state, would be a long shot for the nomination, but more successful on a general election ballot.
We'll have you back to talk about more of this as we get closer to the primaries. David Boaz, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Walmart shoppers are running out of money.